Arrogant aliens thought attacking humans would be easy. But humans fought like demons. From the hell the aliens soon realized they'd entered by fucking with mankind. Hunched over a drink in Starport 117's dimly lit bar, wrinkled hands cupping a whiskey tumbler, 68-year-old Marcus Wright let the potent liquor numb decades-old battle scars. A fresh-faced Ferengi slid onto the stool beside him. "You're Marcus Wright, right? Fought in the human-Ferengi war. I'm Boron, just out of Galactic Academy. I'd kill to hear how humans turned the tide against us." The whelp signaled the bartender for another round. Marcus shot him a piercing glare. Most days he'd tell the brat to piss off, but today the whiskey-induced haze parted just enough for memories to flood in. His jaw clenched. "Strap in, then, because when the Ferengi fucked around with humans, we showed them what finding out meant." The galaxy before the war was a different beast. Ferengi trade ships spread across star systems like weeds, choking out competition. Advanced tech let them steamroll lesser races. Humans, new to the stars, looked like cavemen to them, dumb hicks to rob blind. The fuse lit when Captain Damon Tal tried swindling human colonists on Prometheus out of their ore. Jacob Green, an ex-Marine, told Tal to stuff that exploitative contract up his ass. Tal's crew went berserk, deciding to take the ore by force. But you don't come at a nest of pissed-off human vets without expecting one mother of a fight. Improvised weapons and guerrilla smarts against fancy alien blasters. Prometheus smashed those Ferengi pricks back to their mamas, a black eye for the Commerce Authority's master race. So they aimed to prove their dicks were bigger than mankind's, even if it meant bullshit pretenses for war. If humans got stomped flat, the Ferengi could plunder the galaxy. If mankind didn't band together, tap into its savage warrior roots, and kick Xeno ass like never before, we were all one bad day away from chains or mass graves. "Another drink, Gramps? Because what you just said, I gotta hear the rest." Marcus drained his glass. Maybe today was a telling old war stories day after all. Boron's eyes widened as he leaned in close. "Holy shit, Gramps. I had no idea we got our asses handed to us like that. What happened next?" Marcus knocked back his drink and slammed the glass on the bar. "What happened next? The Ferengi fucked around and found out, that's what. See, those Xeno bastards thought they had us by the balls. They sent 100 of their fanciest ships, led by that flagship they loved so much, the FTS Prophet's Revenge. Real subtle name, ain't it? Well, they aimed to conquer Earth and all our colonies in one big sweep." The old soldier chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "But here's the thing about humans, kid. We don't roll over easy, especially not for some up-jumped space weasels who think they're hot shit 'cause they got better guns. Nah, we had tricks up our sleeve they never saw coming." Marcus's eyes took on a faraway look as he continued. "I was just a grunt back then, part of the UEDF, United Earth Defense Force. We were the poor suckers on the front lines, staring down the Ferengi's pet monstrosity on Titan. That's a moon of Saturn, in case they didn't teach you that in school. The brass expected us to get steamrolled by the Ferengi troops that landed there. And yeah, their tech was leagues beyond ours, but they made a big mistake, underestimating human ingenuity and just how goddamn stubborn we can be when our backs are against the wall." He leaned forward, voice low and intense. "Captain James Hawkins was in charge of our unit. Brilliant guy, always thinking 3 steps ahead. He's the one who came up with the plan to ambush those Ferengi fuckers in this old methane processing plant. Nasty place full of hazards that'd make your skin peel off if you looked at 'em wrong. But that's exactly what we used against 'em. Lured a whole squad of the bastards inside, then turned the whole place into a death trap. Valves malfunctioning, doors sealing shut, industrial chemicals leaking everywhere. It was like something out of a horror movie." Marcus's gaze hardened. "We wiped them out, Boron, every last one of them, choking and writhing and clawing at their burning flesh. And we didn't lose a single man doing it. That was the day the Ferengi learned that human cavemen could bite back hard." He sat back, draining the dregs of his whiskey. Word started getting around after that, about how these upstart Terrans were fighting dirty and clever and winning. Wasn't long before some of the other species the Ferengi stepped on started getting ideas of their own. The FCA tried to tighten their grip, but the more they squeezed, the more star systems slipped through their fingers. It was like watching a dam crack and crumble in slow motion. Humans, Gormaganders, Tellarites, even the Orions, we were all sick of the Ferengi's shit. So we banded together and started pushing back hard. Marcus went quiet for a long moment, ghosts of memory flickering behind his eyes. Fallen friends, old scars, the smell of blood and fire. Boron fidgeted on his stool, unsure if he should say anything. But he desperately wanted to hear the rest of the tale. Marcus took a swig from his glass, the golden liquid sloshing around the ice cubes. He fixed Boron with a steely gaze, ready to continue his tale. Just when we thought we had those Ferengi bastards on the ropes, they pulled out their trump card. The Dreadnought, a massive fuck-off starship armed to the teeth with enough firepower to glass a whole planet. And the crown jewel, an experimental tachyon cannon that could rip through a ship's hull like tissue paper. He let out a bitter chuckle. The FCA thought they could strong-arm us into surrendering by waving that monstrosity in our faces. They figured we'd be pissing ourselves at the mere thought of going up against it. But they didn't count on one thing: Commander Jacob Green. Boron's eyes widened. The hero of Prometheus. I thought he was just a legend. Oh, he was real, all right, and he had a quad of steel balls to match. See, Green had risen through the ranks since his days on Prometheus. Now he was a big shot in the UEDF, and he wasn't about to let some Ferengi doomsday device turn humanity into a footnote in the history books. Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Green put together a team of the baddest motherfuckers in the UEDF. I was one of the lucky sons of bitches who got tapped for the job. Our mission? Infiltrate the Dreadnought and sabotage that fucking tachyon cannon. He shook his head, a wry smile playing at the corners of his mouth. It was a suicide mission, plain and simple, but we all knew what was at stake. If we didn't take out that ship, the Ferengi would use it to bring the hammer down on every human colony from here to Andromeda. We managed to sneak aboard the Dreadnought using a captured Ferengi shuttle. But once we were inside, all hell broke loose. The ship was crawling with Ferengi troops, all of them armed to the fucking teeth. And then there were the super soldiers. Boron frowned. Super soldiers? Genetically enhanced killing machines. Faster, stronger, and meaner than any Ferengi grunt we'd faced before. We ran into a squad of them in the engine room, and let me tell you, it was like fighting a pack of rabid wolves. Marcus absently rubbed a faded scar on his forearm. We lost some good men in that fight, but we managed to push through thanks to Green's leadership, and some damn fine shooting from yours truly. Finally, we reached the tachyon cannon's control center, and that's when things got really hairy. The ship's commander, a vicious son of a bitch named Crag Dor, was waiting for us. He had a whole platoon of Ferengi elite guards with him, all of them ready to turn us into Swiss cheese. But Green, that crazy bastard, he had an ace up his sleeve. While we were fighting our way through the ship, he'd rigged the tachyon cannon to overload. One push of a button, and the whole Dreadnought would go up in a ball of fire. Marcus grinned, a fierce light in his eyes. You should have seen the look on Cragdor's face when Green told him. I thought the fucker was going to have an aneurysm right then and there. But he knew he was beat. He ordered his men to stand down and surrendered the ship to us. The news spread like wildfire. The mighty Dreadnought, the Ferengi's ultimate weapon, defeated by a handful of human soldiers. It was a turning point in the war. Suddenly, all these other races who'd been living under the Ferengi's boot saw that they could fight back, that they could win. He leaned back in his seat, the weight of memory heavy on his shoulders. The Ferengi started pulling back after that. Their war machine was in shambles, and they knew it, but the fight wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. Marcus fell silent, his gaze distant as he relived the final days of the conflict in his mind. Boron waited with bated breath, knowing that the old soldier's tale was far from over. Marcus took a deep breath, his eyes blazing with the intensity of the memories. With the Dreadnought defeated and the Ferengi on the run, we knew it was time to go for the jugular. The UEDF top brass had a plan, a full-scale invasion of Ferenginar, the Weasel's homeworld. We were going to take the fight right to their doorstep and make them surrender once and for all. He chuckled darkly. It was a hell of a gamble, but we had momentum on our side. The Ferengi were reeling, and we had allies now. The Tellarites, the Andorians, even some Klingon mercenaries who were more than happy to stick it to the FCA. We assembled the biggest fleet in human history and set course for Ferenginar. Marcus's voice grew somber. The Battle of Ferenginar, that's what they call it now in the history books. But let me tell you, kid, it was more like a goddamn meat grinder. The Ferengi knew we were coming, and they were ready for us. They threw everything they had at our ships, plasma torpedoes, disruptor banks, even kamikaze attacks. It was like flying into the jaws of hell itself. He shook his head, lost in the memory. We took heavy losses in those first few hours, ships burning, men dying left and right, but we pushed on, blasting our way through their defenses until we reached the planet's surface. That's when the real fighting began. Marcus's eyes narrowed. I was part of the ground assault under the command of Sergeant Mike Thompson, mean son of a bitch, but he knew his stuff. Our objective was to take the capital city and secure the FCA headquarters. The Ferengi had it locked down tight, with their best troops dug in like ticks. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a growl. Thompson led us straight into the thick of it. We fought street to street, building to building, blasting those Ferengi bastards with everything we had. They were tough, I'll give them that. Their elite guard had energy shields and disruptor rifles that could cut a man in half. We lost a lot of good soldiers to those fucking things. Marcus's hand clenched into a fist. But Thompson, he had a plan. We fought our way to the FCA headquarters, a big ugly tower in the center of the city. The place was a fortress, with layers of defenses and troops swarming like ants. Thompson knew we couldn't take it head-on, so he came up with a crazy idea. He grinned, a fierce, predatory expression. We targeted the building's support columns, concentrated all our fire on those load-bearing structures, blasting away until they started to buckle. The Ferengi realized what we were doing, but it was too late. The whole damn thing came crashing down, burying half their elite guard under a mountain of rubble. Marcus sat back, a grim satisfaction in his eyes. That broke them. The Ferengi, I mean. Seeing their headquarters collapse, their best troops crushed like insects. It shattered their will to fight. We swept through the rest of the city like a tidal wave, and soon enough, the planet was ours. He took a long, slow sip of his whiskey, savoring the burn. The FCA High Command, the ones who hadn't eaten their own disruptors, they knew the gig was up. They called for a meeting to discuss the terms of surrender, and let me tell you, kid, that was a sight to see. Marcus's voice took on a note of grudging respect. The Grand Nagus himself, the big cheese of the FCA, he was there. Ferengi general staff, alien leaders, and a whole gaggle of UEDF brass, Tellarite admirals, Andorian captains. It was like a goddamn intergalactic summit. He snorted. The Nagus, he looked like he'd swallowed a live grenade. I thought he was going to piss himself when they put the treaty in front of him. But he signed it, had no choice. That scrap of paper ended the war, right then and there. Marcus went quiet, his gaze distant. It was over. We'd won. Humanity had taken on the biggest bad in the galaxy and come out on top. But the cost? He shook his head. A lot of good men and women didn't make it back. Friends, comrades, people I'd have taken a plasma bolt for. He looked at Boron, a hint of moisture in his eyes. That's the thing about war, kid. It takes a toll no matter which side you're on. We left a hell of a lot of blood and bone on Ferenginar. I can still see their faces sometimes when I close my eyes. Marcus drained the last of his whiskey, staring into the empty glass. Boron, seemingly at a loss for words, waited patiently for the old soldier to continue. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of memories that would never fade. Finally, Marcus looked up, his eyes clear and focused. He had one last chapter to share, the story of what came after the guns fell silent and the smoke cleared. Marcus fell silent, the weight of memory hanging heavy in the air. He stared down into his empty glass, the amber dregs of whiskey clinging to the bottom like the last remnants of a fading dream. Boron shifted on his stool, sensing the old soldier's struggle to find the words for what came next. Winning the war, it wasn't the end of the story, kid. Not by a long shot. Marcus's voice was low and rough, as if the words themselves were scraping against his throat. We paid a hell of a price for that victory, more than most folks will ever know. He looked up, his eyes burning with a fierce intensity. Some of our best and brightest, the ones who got us through the darkest days, they didn't make it back. Commander Jacob Green, Captain James Hawkins. They gave their lives to see humanity through to the other side, and they weren't the only ones. Marcus's gaze grew distant, as if he were seeing the faces of the fallen etched into the dingy bar walls. The UEDF, we were stretched thin, trying to hold together all the pieces of the galaxy we'd just blown apart. Suddenly we were the ones in charge of keeping the peace, and let me tell you, that's a hell of a lot harder than fighting a war. He shook his head, a bitter chuckle escaping his lips. The Tellarites, the Andorians, even the damn Klingons, they all fought beside us against the Ferengi. But once the shooting stopped, all those old grudges and rivalries came bubbling back to the surface. It was like trying to hold together a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing. Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper, as if he were confessing a secret he'd carried for a lifetime. And then there were the ones who made it back. But not in one piece. The things we saw, the things we did, they leave a mark on you, deep down where nobody can see. He tapped a finger against his temple, a rueful smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I lost count of the nights I spent staring at the ceiling, watching the battles play out in my head over and over again. The sounds, the smells, they never really go away. And I know I wasn't the only one. Marcus's eyes glistened with unshed tears, his grizzled features softening for a moment. Sergeant Mike Thompson. He was a goddamn hero, kid. The things he did on Ferenginar, the lives he saved. But in the end, it wasn't enough. He couldn't outrun the demons, no matter how hard he tried. A few years after the war, he ate his own blaster. Just couldn't take the nightmares anymore. The old soldier took a shuddering breath, the weight of the memory pressing down on his shoulders like a physical force. Boron remained silent, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and horror at the tale unfolding before him. Marcus leaned forward, his gaze boring into Boron's with an intensity that made the young Ferengi's skin crawl. That's the thing about war, kid. It's not about the battles you win or the enemies you defeat. It's about the pieces of yourself you leave behind on the battlefield and the scars you carry with you long after the fighting's done. He raised his empty glass in a silent toast, his eyes distant and haunted. To the ones who didn't make it back, and to the ones who did, but left the best parts of themselves out there among the stars. With that, Marcus drained the last drops of whiskey from his glass and pushed himself to his feet, the stool scraping against the floor with a harsh, grating sound. He looked down at Boron, a sad smile playing across his weathered features. Remember that, kid. Remember the cost of what we did and the price we paid for the peace we bought with our blood and sweat and tears. That's the only way to make sure it wasn't all for nothing. He turned and strode towards the door, his footsteps heavy and deliberate against the worn floorboards. Boron watched him go, the old soldier's words echoing in his mind like the distant thunder of artillery fire. As the bar door swung shut behind Marcus, Boron found himself alone with his thoughts, the weight of history pressing down on him like a physical force. He stared into the depths of his own untouched drink, seeing the faces of the fallen reflected back at him in the amber liquid. The young Ferengi realized with a sudden clarity that left him breathless that the scars of the human-Ferengi war ran deeper than he had ever imagined. The victory that had once seemed so glorious, so definitive, now felt hollow and bittersweet in the face of the sacrifices that had been made to achieve it. Boron's gaze drifted to the empty stool beside him, the ghost of Marcus's presence still lingering in the air, like the fading notes of a half-remembered song. He knew that the old soldier's tale would stay with him long after he left the confines of the dimly lit bar, a reminder of the true cost of war and the fragile nature of the peace they had fought so hard to achieve. If you finish this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.